Hello, I am Victor Paredes, I am the product manager of Moho, and in this tutorial I want to show you the bone dynamics and the wind dynamics. I wanted to show you these two features together because they share some of the same tools and the same way to work with. So I want to start with this scene from the Moho debut box, and I want to start by animating this dog. Okay, so I created a new file only with this dog, and it is a very simple file. If I test this rig with the manipulate bone tool in frame 0, okay, so I have the bone layer selected, the manipulate bone tool, and I am in frame 0. If I test this character, you can see I can bend it, I can modify the ears a little bit, the tongue and the tail. It's a very simple character. So in order to work with in order to test the dynamics, we are going to create a little animation, a little cycle, just to have something for the dynamics to react to. Okay, so what I am going to do is in frame 1 here in the timeline, I just move this to frame 1, I will select these two bones. Okay, I'm using the select bone tool. I have the lasso mode activated, so I can do this. You can also select several bones if you hold shift in the keyboard and click several bones. Okay, but I will select these two and I will go to the transform bone tool, and with this tool I want to modify the scale of the bones. So in order to do that, I will take the dot at the top of the bone and drag it to the left if I want to reduce the size, or to the right if I want to increase the size. So in this case I want to reduce it, let's suppose something like this. And now I will go to frame 7 and I will drag it to the right because I want the size to be bigger. And now in frame 13 I'm just creating a cycle, so I will copy and paste the same keyframe from frame 1. In this case I'm using the scale channel here, and I am using the red line because the red line of the red channel shows me only the keyframes of the bones I have selected. So I will copy this keyframe with Ctrl C or Command C and paste it with Ctrl V or Command V. Okay, so now I have this movement. Alright, but now I want to create a cycle with it because I want this animation to continue happening during the scene. So to do that, I just right click over the last keyframe of this movement, and here I select cycle. Okay, and this window will automatically be opened, and here I can set up the cycle. So by default it's absolute, but we have also the relative option here. In this case, for now, I will set it to absolute, and I will set the frame to go back to frame 2. Okay, so I set 2 here and I hit enter, and now you can see here this arrow is going back to frame 2. So that means this cycle will end at this frame and then it will continue going to frame 2 during all the time. So that's what the cycle is doing. Now I set frame 2 and not frame 1 because frame 1 is exactly the same frame than the last one. So frame 13 and frame 1 are the same. So if I make the cycle go back to frame 1, what I will have will be two frames that will have exactly the same value. Okay, so my cycle will feel a little cut because I will have these two frames. So it won't be smooth, it will be like up, up, up. That's the best way I can describe it. So that's why I go to frame 2 instead. Alright, now we set this cycle as absolute, and that means that even if I move this keyframe, the cycle will always go back to frame 2. Okay, let me move this back. But actually what I want in this case is a relative cycle. So I will select this again and I will select relative here. And the value is similar. I mean, the cycle is going back to the same frame, but instead of going back to frame 2 as an absolute value, it's going back 11 frames. So it's counting from here 11 frames, and then it puts the cycle. So the difference between these two cycles is now if I move this cycle here, I mean if I move this keyframe, the cycle also moves. Okay, and this is very useful for what we want to do. Okay, so we have the relative cycle setup, and now I have this movement happening here. Okay, but now I want to offset a little bit the movement. So in order to do that, I will select the select bone tool, and I will select only the top bone here. Okay, so now the red channel is showing me only the keyframes of this bone. Okay, and now I will select the entire cycle here, the 3 keyframes of the cycle, and I will offset it a few frames. So now the animation is not happening at the same time. It is exactly the same animation, but one bone is doing the animation a little bit earlier than the other one. So it gives a nice sensation of something more liquid in some way, more natural. So it's nice for this kind of animation. So we are going to do something similar, but now with the angle. So with the transform bone tool again, now I will rotate these 2 bones to the left. So I will start rotating this one, and now rotating this one, and now in frame 7 I will rotate it to the right. Okay, and you can see now the rotation channel is visible here. And now in frame 13 I will select these 2 bones again, and I will copy the keyframe, the rotation keyframe, from here to frame 13. And now I will set the cycle, right click, cycle, going to frame 2, but I want it relative. Okay, so it will go back 11 frames instead. So now I have this. Okay, and it's not looking great, I know, but now we are going to select only this bone on the top, and again we are going to offset it. So now we have this instead. So again, the movement is exactly the same, but it's moving at the bones are moving at different times. Okay, so now we have our cycle ready. So now I want to put some dynamic bones to react to this movement. So to do that, I go back to frame 0. I will select with the select bone tool. I will select all the bones here, so all the ears and the hair, and also I will hold shift on my keyboard and I will select the tongue. Okay, so now once I have that and I have this the select bone tool, I can go to the bone constraints here. So I can click it. This will appear only if you have the select bone tool selected. Okay, so now I can go to bone dynamics here. I can activate it, and you can see I have some values here, but I won't show you the values yet. Okay, but give me one minute. So I will close this, and now if I hit play, you can see the bones are already moving, so they are reacting to the cycle we created. Okay, so they are reacting to the movement of the character. So what I am going to do now, it's again in frame 0. Let me open the bone constraints, and I want to show you the values here. So the first value is torque force, so that means how much the bone will rotate following this movement. So the higher this value is, the more the bone will rotate. Okay, the second value is the spring force, and the spring force is how much bounciness this bone will have. Okay, so the bigger the value is, the more this bone will bounce. Okay, and the smaller it is, the softer the movement will be. And the last value is damping, and the damping is how much will this bone or for how long this bone will continue moving. So the bigger the damping is, the less movement will have the bone, and the smaller the more the bone will move. So for instance, if you take your character and you shake it to the left, the bone will react, right? The dynamic bone will react to that. But if the damping force is very low, is very small, the reaction will happen, and then the bone will continue moving for a while, and then will start stopping very slowly until it stops. Now, if the value is very high, if you move this, the bone will react and then it will stop almost immediately. Okay, because the damping is higher. right? Now I have seen some tutorials and they tell you that you have to put some values here. So some people say, I don't know, like 4 for this, and then 2, and then 2, and this is the ideal value for any character or something like that. And personally I think this is not true, because characters are different and the values change depending on the material you want to simulate, the scale the character has, or depending what the character is doing during the animation. There are many factors there, so these values are not really universal. Now let's test these values I just put randomly. If I hit play, they are not working very well. You can see there is a lot of bounciness and craziness happening there, and it's not very nice. Now the good part of this is that you don't need to guess the values. Okay, so don't worry, you don't need to be testing every single value until you get something. There is another technique, and this is, you select the bones, of course. You want to modify, you are in frame 0, and if you hit play, now you can open the bone constraints while the animation is playing, and if you hold right click and move the mouse or the pen left or right by holding the right click, you can modify these values and you can see the effect in real time. So in this case I told you that I feel these bones are bouncing too much, so I will reduce the spring value, and you can see how it is working much nicer now. So the bones are not bouncing like crazy. And maybe I want some more torsion, so I will increase this value, and maybe now it's too much, so I will put some damping there. Okay, maybe less spring, or maybe a little more. So you can play with this, and you can play until you are happy with the movement here. So let's suppose I'm happy at least for the ears and the hair. So I will close this, and now I will go back to frame 0, and I will select only the tongue, and I will repeat the process because I want the tongue to be made of another material. So I will hit play, open the bone constraints, and maybe I want it to have more springiness, maybe more torsion, but maybe more damping at the same time. So I don't know, this depends on what you want for the animation. So let's suppose I want something like that. So you can see now the tongue feels like a different material. So you can modify any bone you want. So you can modify several bones at the same time, or you can start modifying bones one by one if you want. So that's it, that's dynamics. So yeah, it's not perfect, but it's working nicely now. Now let's jump to the wind. So I have this character from the same scene, and this is a very simple rig. Actually, it's, if I test it, I am in frame 0, and if I test it with the manipulate bone tool, you can see it's only a few bones to modify the hair here, and also the lips here, and some of the clothes. Okay, but there is not much happening here. So to activate the wind, it's something similar to working with the dynamics. So actually I need to select the bones. In this case I will select all the bones because I want to apply the wind over all the bones here. So I will select all, open the bone constraints. Remember I am in frame 0 to do this. Check the bone dynamics, but now also check the wind here. Okay, and now if I close this and I hit play, you can see the hair is already moving because it's being affected by the default wind. So now let me go back to frame 0 here. If I want to modify the wind, I can simply select the wind tool here, and I can hit play, and here I have some values, and I can also modify these values in real time in the same way we did with the dynamics. So we have first the direction. So we can modify the direction, and you can see this arrow is showing you the direction the wind is pointing. We have also the strength, so the bigger we make this number, the stronger the wind will be, and you can see the strength is represented by the size of the arrow. And now we have two values which are actually related to the direction and the strength, and this is turbulent amplitude and frequency. Okay, Now, these values are very important because if you have a direction of your wind, so for instance you are pointing your wind to the left and it is very strong, but it doesn't have any turbulence, the wind will be very flat, and the movement of the bones won't do much because the wind is pointing to one direction and it's not doing anything else. So probably all your bones will look still pointing to the same direction because the wind is not natural, it's not really moving. And the turbulence animation works for that, so it adds some random movement to your wind. So even if you define the strength and the direction of the wind, you can add some random movement. So the amplitude is how much the angle will change here. So the bigger this value is, the wider the angle will be modified by the wind. And the same happens with the strength. So if this value is big, it will be how much the strength is modified in time automatically. So it will give you some more natural result. And the other value is the frequency. And this value is how often that modification happens. So the bigger the frequency is, the quicker the movement will be. So let me show you here. So if I give it a very big movement, you can see how the direction and the strength is changing very quickly. And if I give it a smaller number, it almost doesn't change. Okay, so now the good part is these values you can animate them. So for instance, if I go to frame 0, I can set the strength to frame 1. If I go to frame 1, I can set the strength to 0 and hit enter, and that will create a keyframe for the wind strength channel. So now I can say, okay, let's suppose the wind starts in 0 and then in frame, I don't know, 27 it is 50. So now we have that animation. So the wind is starting very weak and then it's stronger. And maybe, I don't know, maybe in 51 I want it to be 0 again. And maybe I want to create a cycle with this. Absolute, that goes back to frame 2. And now I have this wind being weaker and stronger in time. Okay, I can also modify the direction. So if I am in any frame and I modify the direction, it will create a new keyframe here. And I can also modify it by dragging the arrow. So you can also play with that. So maybe it's pointing here and maybe then it's pointing to the right. So now we have this movement for the direction. So you can play with that. You can also create a cycle if you want. And the same happens with the turbulence. You can modify it. If I modify, I have a third channel which is for turbulence. And the same applies. So you can modify how the wind is affecting the character. And now the final thing about the wind is that, do you remember that with the dynamics we could modify the values to get a different material? So we could modify the torsion, the spring and the damping. We can do the same with the bones affected by the wind. So if I hit play, I can open the bone constraints and I can modify the values for the bones I have selected too. So maybe I want less spring. So now you can see the hair is much softer. So it looks a bit more natural. Of course I need to adjust this to work better, but you can see how it looks more natural. And maybe I want more damping, so the wind won't affect it for so long. And maybe I can modify the torsion too. So all these three values also work to modify the material. So you have two tools. You have the tool to modify the wind and what the wind is doing, and you have the other tools to modify how the material reacts to that wind. Okay, and this is here. So you have a few values. You have 7 values. You have 3 values here and 4 values for the wind, and that's it. And with that you can create some very nice things. and you can check it in real time. And finally, I want to show you the example of the characters in the Moho Pro 13.5 box, because we have some wind here too. So you can see it's very soft and it works nicely for this scene because it's not moving too much, it's not doing a lot, but it's affecting the scene. And let me just remove the values of the wind because I want to modify, I want to break this scene. So let me just select the wind scene, I mean the wind tool, and we can change the strength, so maybe it will be much stronger. We can change the direction, so we can change where the wind is pointing. Okay, maybe we can change the way the turbulence work, so now we have more like a storm happening here. And a nice thing that I tested the other day and I liked it is that, for instance, if you make your wind to point up, and maybe you have a very small strength and maybe not much frequency, you can also create some kind of underwater scene. Of course, it's not working great right now, but you can modify these values, and of course you could modify also the values of the plant, but you can also use the wind to simulate other kind of animation. So I know it doesn't look underwater right now, but you could do it. You could do it better than me, at least. So yeah, so that's wind, and that's dynamics, that's cycles, and that's wind. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye.